My name is Miriam Brooks, and I was born on the Belmont Plantation in the swampy lowlands of Louisiana, where the air hangs thick as molasses and the mosquitoes swarm in clouds that darken the twilight. I don't know the exact year of my birth. No one thought it important enough to record, but I know I've seen at least 35 summers come and go, each one hotter and more suffocating than the last. The plantation sits on the edge of the bayou, surrounded by cypress trees draped in Spanish moss that looks like the gray hair of ghosts, and the smell of rot and growth mingles together in a way that never lets you forget that life and death are always dancing close. I work in the big house, which some of the field hands think makes me fortunate. They see the shade I have, the roof over my head when it storms, the proximity to better food. But they don't see what I see. They don't feel what I feel when Mistress Belmont walks past me as if I were a piece of furniture, when Master Belmont gives orders to the air because looking at my face would require acknowledging I have won. In the fields, at least, your body matters, your strength, your endurance, the cotton you pick. In the big house, I am expected to be invisible while somehow anticipating every need to exist and not exist simultaneously. I move through the rooms like a shadow, dusting the mahogany furniture that costs more than 100 lives like mine, polishing silver that reflects everyone's face but my own worth. I serve meals I helped cook, but will never sit down to eat. I dress Mistress Belmont in gowns that cost enough to buy my freedom 10 times over, buttoning each tiny pearl button up her back while she discusses the latest social event as if I don't have ears, as if I don't have thoughts, as if I am merely a pair of hands performing a function. The worst part isn't the work. I've known hard work since I could walk. My mama, before she was sold away when I was 9, taught me that work is dignified, that what our hands create has value, that we pour our souls into everything we do. No, the worst part is the erasure. It's the way they talk over me, around me, through me. It's the way Master Belmont discusses selling my cousin Jacob at the dinner table while I'm serving the soup, as casually as if he were discussing livestock, which I suppose to him is exactly what we are. It's the way Mistress Belmont will ask me if her dress looks well, but when I answer, she looks past me to the mirror as if my opinion was just sound without meaning. I have a daughter, Ruby. She's 12 now, with eyes that remind me of my mama's, bright and watchful, missing nothing. She works in the kitchen mostly, learning to cook under old Bess, who's been here longer than anyone can remember. Every morning when I see Ruby, I search her face for signs that she's becoming like me, learning to make herself small, learning to swallow words, learning that her thoughts and feelings are inconveniences to be hidden away. And every morning, I see a little more of that light in her eyes dimming, and it tears something inside me that never quite heals. I fear most that Ruby will grow up believing what they want us to believe, that we don't matter, that our lives are only valuable in relation to theirs, that our tears are less wet, our hunger less real, our love less deep. I see it happening already. Last week, she dropped a plate and it shattered, and Mistress Belmont slapped her across the face without breaking stride in her conversation with her sister. Ruby didn't cry. She just stood there, staring at the broken porcelain at her feet, and apologized in a voice that had no feeling in it at all. Later, I found her behind the kitchen house, finally crying, but not from the pain of the slap. "I ruined the plate, Mama," she said. "That plate probably cost more than me." How do you tell your child she's wrong when you're not sure she is? How do you convince her that her life has value in a world constructed entirely to prove otherwise? I think about my mama often, especially at night when the big house finally settles, and I lie on my narrow pallet in the room behind the kitchen that I share with 2 other houseworkers. I wonder where she is, if she's still alive, if she thinks of me. I remember her hands, strong and gentle at once, and the songs she would hum while she worked. She never sang the words where they could hear, but I knew them. They were songs about crossing over, about Jordan's River, about a home far away. I didn't understand then that she was singing about freedom. I thought she was singing about heaven, about death being the only escape. Now I realize maybe she was singing about both. The other houseworkers and I, we don't talk much about how we feel. What's the point? We all know. We all carry the same weight. There's Dinah, who's about my age, who works the laundry and whose hands are permanently raw and cracked from the lye soap. There's young Thomas, who tends the fires and the heavy carrying, whose back bears the scars of a whipping he received 3 years ago for looking too long at Mistress Belmont's visiting niece. We move around each other with careful respect, sharing the small kindnesses we can, an extra biscuit, a word of warning when the master's in a mood, a moment of silent company when one of us is grieving. But even among us, there's a loneliness that can't be bridged. Because each of us is fighting our own battle to remember that we matter, and it's a fight we have to wage inside our own heads where no one else can help. The summer I turned 35 was when it all began to feel unbearable. Not because anything particularly dramatic happened, but because of the accumulation, like water slowly filling a bucket, drip by drip, until one day you realize it's about to overflow. It started with small things that weren't really small at all. Mistress Belmont got it in her head that she needed a new lady's maid, someone younger and prettier for when guests visited. She didn't say this to me directly, of course. She said it to her husband over breakfast while I was pouring coffee, as if I were deaf, as well as invisible. "Miriam is getting on in years," she said, examining her nails. "Perhaps we should bring one of the younger girls up from the quarters. That Lily girl has a pleasant face." I stood there, coffee pot in hand, and felt something crack inside my chest. Getting on in years. I was 35. Not old, not anywhere close to old, but already being discarded like a worn-out shoe. And the casual way she said it, without even a glance at me, made it clear that my feelings about being replaced didn't even register as a consideration. Master Belmont grunted his agreement, more interested in his newspaper than his wife's staffing decisions. "Do what you like," he said. "Just make sure the girl knows her place. Can't have them getting ideas." I finished pouring the coffee and returned to the kitchen, where I stood at the wash basin with my hands gripping the edge so hard my knuckles went white. Old Bess looked at me with sympathy, but said nothing. What could she say? This was how it was. This was how it always had been. But the thing that haunted me wasn't just my own replacement. It was the thought of Lily, who was maybe 17, being brought up to take my place. Lily with her quiet smile and gentle way with the children in the quarters. I should have felt something other than dread for her, but I couldn't. Because I knew what it would cost her, this promotion that her mother might even see as a blessing. I knew how she would learn to fold herself smaller and smaller until she forgot what her full size felt like. A week later, they had guests, the Thorntons from Baton Rouge, wealthy cotton brokers who came twice a year to discuss business. The dinner was elaborate, requiring all of us to work from dawn until late into the night. I prepared the dining room, setting the table with the fine china and crystal that came from France, arranging flowers from the garden, making everything perfect because anything less would mean punishment for someone. During the dinner, I stood against the wall in the dining room, ready to refill glasses and remove plates, to anticipate needs before they were spoken. The conversation flowed around me like I was a stone in a stream, invisible, unmoving, irrelevant. They discussed politics, the price of cotton, the weather, their children's education. Mrs. Thornton complained about her servants, how lazy they'd become, how you couldn't find good help anymore. They all nodded in agreement. These people who had never worked a day in their lives, who wouldn't know how to boil water or wash their own clothes or survive a single week without us. "The problem," Master Thornton said, gesturing with his wine glass in a way that made me ready to catch it if he dropped it, "is that they don't understand gratitude. We provide for them. Food, shelter, clothing, and they act as if they're entitled to more. It's true, Mistress Belmont agreed, sighing dramatically. Just last week, one of our field hands had the audacity to complain about the rations, as if we're obligated to provide for their every whim. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw every plate of expensive food onto the floor and tell them exactly what gratitude looks like when you're grateful just to see your child alive another day, when you're grateful that today wasn't the day you were beaten or sold or used. But I stood still, face carefully blank, and refilled Master Thornton's wine glass when he held it out without looking at me. After the guests retired to the parlor, I was cleaning up the dining room when I overheard them discussing me. Well, not me specifically, they still hadn't used my name, but the situation of the aging house servant. You really should replace her sooner rather than later, Mrs. Thornton said. They get ideas when they're kept inside too long. Start thinking they're part of the family, or some such nonsense. Oh, Miriam knows her place, Mistress Belmont assured her. She's been well trained, like a dog, like a horse, like anything but a woman with thoughts and feelings and a soul that was dying by inches every day I served them. That night, lying on my pallet, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those words. She's been well trained. And the horrible thing was that it was true. I had been trained to be silent when I wanted to speak, trained to smile when I wanted to cry, trained to accept the unacceptable because acceptance was survival and resistance was death. I thought about my daughter Ruby, asleep in the corridors with the other children, and I wondered what I was teaching her. Was I teaching her strength by showing her how to endure? Or was I teaching her that endurance was all we deserved, that we should be grateful for the scraps of humanity they occasionally threw our way? The memories came then, unwanted but unstoppable. I remembered being Ruby's age, watching my mama be sold. I remembered her face as they led her away, the way she looked back at me one last time with eyes that said everything her mouth couldn't. Be strong. Remember who you are. Survive. I remembered standing in the yard, holding my aunt's hand, watching the wagon take her away down that long drive lined with oak trees, and knowing I would never see her again. I remembered my first love, Samuel, beautiful Samuel with his deep voice and gentle hands, who talked about running away, about freedom in the North, about a life where we could be married for real, not just jumping over a broom in a ceremony that meant nothing to the law. Samuel who tried to run one winter night and was caught before he made it 10 miles. Samuel who was whipped nearly to death as a lesson to the rest of us, and who was never quite the same after, his spirit broken along with his body. Samuel who died 2 years later from a fever, but really from hopelessness, from knowing he would never be free. I remembered the children I'd lost. 2 babies born too early, probably from the stress and the poor food and the endless work. I remembered holding their tiny bodies, so perfect and so still, and knowing they were the lucky ones because they would never have to learn what it meant to be property. These were the memories I usually kept locked away, because to look at them directly was to drown in grief. But tonight, they all came flooding back, and I lay there in the darkness and let myself feel it all. The loss, the pain, the crushing weight of being treated like I didn't matter, day after day, year after year, until sometimes I almost believed it myself. The turning point came on a Tuesday in September, during a moment so small that anyone else might have missed it entirely. Mistress Belmont was preparing for a tea party, and she wanted everything perfect. I had spent the morning polishing silver, pressing linens, arranging flowers, baking tiny cakes and delicate cookies. The parlor looked like something from a magazine, every detail exactly as she wanted it. The ladies arrived in their fine carriages, wearing their fine dresses, carrying their fine parasols. I served tea and cakes, smiled politely when addressed, and made myself as invisible as possible while still being available for every need. Mrs. Chalmers, the banker's wife, was holding forth about her daughter's upcoming wedding. "We've ordered the most exquisite dress from New York," she gushed. The lace alone cost more than, well, more than some people see in a lifetime. She laughed at her own restraint, and the other ladies tittered politely. I poured more tea, my face a practice mask. I just want everything to be perfect for my Louise, Mrs. Chalmers continued. Every girl deserves to feel special on her wedding day, to know that she matters, that this day is all about her. Every girl deserves to know she matters. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to grip the teapot tighter to keep from dropping it, because in that moment I realized that I had once been a girl too. I had once had dreams. I had once imagined a future where I mattered, where my life was my own, where my choices meant something. When had I stopped being that girl? When had I accepted that my life was only valuable in service to others? When had I decided that Ruby's fate was already written, that there was nothing I could do to change it? I finished serving the tea in a daze, my mind racing. After the ladies left, I was cleaning up the parlor when Ruby came in to help. She was unusually quiet, even for her, and I noticed a new bruise on her arm. What happened? I asked, gently touching the mark. She flinched. Master's son, she said quietly. William. He grabbed me this morning when I was carrying water, said I wasn't moving fast enough. William was 15, spoiled and cruel in the thoughtless way of boys raised to believe some people are worth less than others. I felt rage surge through me, hot and dangerous. Did you tell anyone? I asked. Ruby looked at me like I was foolish. Tell who, Mama? Tell what? It doesn't matter. I don't matter. And there it was. My own daughter, at 12 years old, already convinced of her own worthlessness. That's not true, I said, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. How could I convince her when I barely believed it myself? Isn't it? Ruby's eyes filled with tears. You tell me I matter, but everything else tells me I don't. They can hit me whenever they want. They can sell me whenever they want. They can do whatever they want to me, and nobody cares. Not even God cares, Mama, because if he did, why would he let this happen? I had no answer for her. The platitudes I'd been taught to repeat, about bearing our crosses, about reward in heaven, about God's mysterious ways, they all turned to dust in my mouth. Because she was right. What kind of God would allow this? What kind of world was this where my beautiful, bright daughter already knew that her life was worth less than a plate, less than a dress, less than a moment's convenience? That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, instead of drowning in memories, something else was happening. Something was shifting inside me, like a door I'd kept locked for years was finally starting to open. I thought about Mrs. Chalmers' words. Every girl deserves to know she matters. Did I matter? Did Ruby matter? Did all of us, working ourselves to exhaustion, dying young, watching our children grow up in chains, did we matter? The answer came to me with such clarity, it took my breath away. Yes. Yes, we mattered. We had always mattered. Our mattering wasn't dependent on their recognition. Our worth wasn't determined by their valuation. We mattered because we were human beings with hearts that loved and minds that thought and souls that yearned for freedom and dignity. They could own our bodies, but they couldn't own our worth. They could treat us like we didn't matter, but that didn't make it true. This realization should have made me feel better, but instead it made everything worse. Because if we mattered, if we truly, fundamentally mattered, then what was being done to us was even more monstrous than I'd let myself fully comprehend. And if we mattered, then I had a responsibility to act like we mattered. I had a responsibility to teach Ruby that she mattered, not just with words, but with actions. But what could I do? I was one woman, enslaved, powerless in every practical sense. I couldn't free us. I couldn't change the system. I couldn't even guarantee that Ruby and I wouldn't be separated tomorrow if Master Belmont decided to sell one of us. But I could do something. I had to do something. Because the alternative, continuing to live as if we didn't matter, teaching my daughter to accept her own erasure, that was a kind of death worse than the physical kind. I just didn't know what that something was yet. The change started small, almost invisible, but I felt it in my bones like the shift in seasons. The next morning, when Mistress Belmont walked past me without acknowledgement while I was scrubbing the floor, I didn't make myself smaller. I stayed the size I was. It sounds like nothing, but it felt like revolution. For 35 years, I had been trained to contract in their presence, to take up less space, to be less. Now I stayed exactly my size, and when she walked past, I kept my head up. She didn't notice, but I did. When Master Belmont gave orders to the air instead of to me, I started responding with yes, Master Belmont, instead of just nodding silently, forcing him to hear my voice, to acknowledge that there was a person receiving his commands. His eyes flickered with annoyance the first few times, but he didn't comment. With Ruby, I started doing something I'd been too afraid to do before. I started telling her the truth. You matter, I told her one evening when we had a rare moment alone. Not because they say so, not because of anything you do or don't do. You matter because you are a human being, and human beings have worth that no one can take away. But Mama, she started, listen to me. I gripped her shoulders gently but firmly. They're going to try to make you believe you don't matter. Every single day, in 100 different ways, they will try to erase you. You have to decide that you won't be erased. Inside yourself, where they can't reach, you have to know your own worth. Her eyes filled with tears. But what good does that do if nothing changes? Everything changes, I said, when you know who you are. They can own our bodies, Ruby, but they cannot own our souls unless we let them. Your grandmother who was sold away from me, she taught me that. And now I'm teaching you. We are more than what they see. We are more than what they make us do. We matter. I began teaching her other things too. Late at night, using a piece of charcoal and scraps of paper I'd carefully saved, I started teaching her letters. It was illegal, dangerous, punishable by beating or worse. But if she was going to know she mattered, she needed to know she had a mind worth educating. Why are you teaching me this? She asked one night, struggling to form the letter A. Because reading is power, I said. Because knowing things is power. Because someday, somehow, you might need these letters, and I want you to have them. She practiced in secret, hiding the paper under her palette, tracing letters in the dirt, and then smoothing them away. Watching her learn, watching her eyes light up when she recognized a word, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. But my changes weren't just about Ruby. They were about me too, about reclaiming small pieces of myself that I'd locked away. I started humming my mama's songs while I worked. Not loud enough to disturb anyone, but loud enough for me to hear, to remember, to know that those songs were still alive inside me. Songs about crossing over, about freedom, about home. When Mistress Belmont complained about the way I'd arranged her hair, instead of apologizing profusely like I usually did, I simply said, "I'll do it differently tomorrow, ma'am," with no emotion in my voice. She looked at me strangely, sensing something had changed, but not quite able to identify what. I began having conversations with the other enslaved people. Real conversations, not just the careful surface exchanges we usually had. With old Bess in the kitchen, I talked about memories of my mother, about pain and loss and how we survive it. With Dinah, I talked about strength and what it means to endure without giving up who you are. With young Thomas, I talked about dignity and how they could beat our bodies but couldn't beat our spirits unless we let them. Word spread quietly through the quarters. Something's different about Miriam. She's standing different. talking different, like she's remembering something she forgot. The resistance I was practicing was quiet, internal, almost invisible to those who weren't looking carefully. But it was real. Every time I refused to make myself small, every time I taught Ruby a letter, every time I hummed my mama's songs, every time I spoke with conviction about our worth, these were acts of rebellion. They were ways of saying, I am here, I matter, you cannot erase me. The danger, of course, was that Master and Mistress Belmont would notice. The system we lived under was designed to crush exactly this kind of spirit. Any sign of self-worth, of dignity, of resistance, even quiet resistance, was seen as threatening and dealt with harshly. One afternoon, William, Master's son, cornered Ruby near the kitchen house. I was inside, but I heard her voice, firm and clear. Let go of me. I rushed outside to find her standing straight, looking him in the eye, her arm twisted in his grip, but her face unafraid. What did you say to me? William snarled, his face red. I said, let go of me. Ruby's voice didn't waver. I saw the future in that moment. I saw him running to his father, saw the punishment that would come, saw everything I'd been trying to build crashing down. But I also saw something else. I saw my daughter refusing to be erased. I saw her knowing her own worth. I saw her mattering. William. My voice cut through the tension. Your mother is looking for you. Something about your lessons. It was a lie, but it gave him an excuse to leave without losing face. He shoved Ruby away and stalked off, throwing back over his shoulder. You'll both be sorry. When he was gone, I pulled Ruby into my arms. She was shaking now, the bravado gone, just a scared 12-year-old girl who had dared to believe she mattered. You are so brave, I whispered. I was so stupid, she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. Now we'll both be punished. Maybe, I said, but you stood up. You refused to let him treat you like you were nothing. That matters, Ruby. That matters so much. That night, I waited for Master Belmont's rage, for the summons, for the punishment. But it never came. William, it seemed, had been too embarrassed to tell his father that a 12-year-old enslaved girl had defied him. We'd been lucky this time, but I knew our luck wouldn't hold forever. The more we acted like we mattered, the more dangerous our position became. Still, I couldn't go back to who I'd been. I couldn't unknow what I now knew. I couldn't unremember that I was a person, that Ruby was a person, that we all were people with worth that existed independent of their recognition. The question wasn't whether I would continue on this path. The question was how far it would take me and what price I would ultimately have to pay. Winter came to Louisiana, which meant the air turned from suffocating to merely oppressive, and the work in the big house shifted with the season. Christmas approached, and with it, the annual gathering where the Belmonts displayed their wealth and hospitality to all the important families in the parish. I prepared for it as I always had, but I was different now, and I couldn't hide it completely. Mistress Belmont noticed. You've been acting strange, Miriam, she said one morning as I was helping her dress. Her eyes met mine in the mirror, actually met mine, maybe for the first time in years. Almost impertinent. I apologize if I've given offense, ma'am, I said, but my voice was steady, not servile. She turned to look at me directly. You're not sorry at all, are you? For a moment, I considered lying. It would have been safer. But something in me had fundamentally shifted, and I found I couldn't do it anymore. No, ma'am, I said quietly. I'm not. She stared at me, and I saw calculations happening behind her eyes. She could have me beaten. She could have me sold. She held all the power in this moment, and we both knew it. You have a daughter, she said finally, and my blood ran cold. Ruby, sweet girl, It would be a shame if anything happened to her. It was the oldest weapon in their arsenal, threatening our children. And it worked because we would bear anything ourselves, but we couldn't bear seeing our children suffer. Yes, ma'am, I said, fear finally creeping into my voice. Then I suggest you remember your place, she said, turning back to the mirror. That will be all. I left the room on shaking legs. She hadn't acted on her threat, but she'd made it clear she could. Ruby was my vulnerability, and they knew it. That night, I held Ruby close and told her about the exchange. I'm going to keep fighting, I said. Keep believing we matter. Keep teaching you that you matter. But I need you to be careful. Can you do that? Can you be strong inside while being careful outside? She nodded against my chest. Like you, Mama. Like me. I agreed. The Christmas gathering came and went. I served them all, the wealthy families, the important people, and I did my job perfectly. But inside, I was free in a way they could never touch. Inside, I knew who I was. After Christmas, something unexpected happened. Young Thomas came to me with news he'd heard from a field hand who'd heard it from someone at a neighboring plantation. There were people, white people, in the North who were fighting to end slavery. There were routes north, dangerous but real, ways to escape to freedom. Some folks are planning to try, Thomas said quietly, in the spring, when the days get longer and the weather's better for traveling. They wanted me to ask if you and Ruby wanted to go. Freedom. The word tasted like honey and terror all at once. I thought about Ruby, about her future, about what kind of life waited for her here. I thought about myself, about the woman I'd become, the woman who knew her worth and couldn't unknow it. I thought about my mama, sold away, and Samuel, who died trying to be free, and my babies who never got to live at all. I need to think about it, I said. But I already knew my answer. In the weeks that followed, I prepared in secret. I taught Ruby everything I could, letters, numbers, the names of stars to navigate by, which plants were safe to eat. I gathered small things, a knife, a blanket, dried food hidden away bit by bit. I watched and learned the patterns of the overseers, the places where the dogs couldn't track, the houses rumored to help runaways. I might die trying to reach freedom. Ruby might die. We might be caught and punished in ways that would make death seem merciful. But I had tasted something I couldn't spit back out, the knowledge of my own worth. And I wanted Ruby to grow up free, to never again have to choose between being herself and being safe. The night before we planned to leave, I stood in the big house one last time. I looked at all the beautiful things I'd cleaned and polished and maintained, things worth more than my life, according to the people who owned them. And I felt nothing but pity for people who measured worth in silver and crystal and didn't understand that the woman who polished them was worth infinitely more than all of it combined. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if we'd make it to freedom. But I knew this. I would never again act as if I didn't matter. I would never again teach my daughter that her worth was dependent on their recognition. I would never again make myself small to fit into their narrow view of what I should be. They had treated me like I didn't matter for 35 years. They had been wrong for 35 years. And whether I lived or died, whether I found freedom or not, I would spend whatever days I had left knowing the truth. I was Miriam Brooks. I was someone's daughter and someone's mother, and I mattered. I mattered then, I mattered now, and I would matter always, not because anyone acknowledged it, but because it was the immutable truth of my existence. As I slipped out into the Louisiana night with Ruby's hand tight in mine, heading toward an uncertain future but away from a certain death of the spirit, I whispered my mama's song into the darkness, a song about crossing over, about going home, about being free. I had always mattered. I just had to remember it long enough to make them see what they'd been blind to all along. that you cannot own what was never yours, and my worth was never theirs to give or take away.